Welcome to one of the largest farming gatherings in the world, the Salon d'Agriculture in Paris. This year we're stealing attention away from cows like Misa in favour of renewable energy. This week we're asking whether a new generation of biofuels can succeed where others have failed. Coming up, from agriculture to algaculture. Does farming algae have what it takes to revolutionise biofuel production on a global scale? We head to the beaches in Brittany to find out. Next, we make a stop in Scotland to toast a new venture to transform whisky-making byproducts into a green source of fuel. And finally, duck fat is given a second life in the south of France, where farmers are turning the grease into a biodiesel. Nestled among the sunflowers and the canola, we've come across the sugar beet. Yes, a source of sugar to eat, but also a source of bioethanol. And what we have here is a vehicle that runs on superethanol, but let's be clear here, is there really sugar beet in this fuel?
Yes, there really is sugar beet in the tank of this car. It's transformed into ethanol, which feeds the motor. It's a specific type of motor, something known as flex fuel, which can run on ethanol, but also on other types of fuel. There's two good reasons to use superethanol 85. It's more economic, 50% cheaper at the pump, and it's also better for the environment because it reduces carbon dioxide emissions by more than 60% compared to conventional fuels.
Of course, not all biofuels have lived up to expectations. One of the glimmering hope rests with algae, the ancient art of seaweed, a possible solution to a 21st century energy problem. At low tide, this beach is an outdoor laboratory for the scientists who work at Roscoff. Home to 700 different algae species, the largest collection in Europe. Not all of them can be used as biofuel, but with patience and know-how it's possible to find the right type.
This algae here is a real sugar factory. More than 50% of its dry weight is sugar. We have high hopes that this algae, which can be cultivated in very large quantities, can be a source of bioethanol in the future.
It's only in the last 5 years that algae has been considered a serious contender in the race to find a low-carbon biofuel. This after the first generation, such as those made from palm oil and rapeseed, were blamed for driving up food prices by using fertile land to grow biofuel crops. By contrast, algae grows in the sea.
Algae is less dependent on using land that would otherwise be destined to be food, and that's a big advantage.
Research into macroalgae or seaweed is focusing on how to turn its high sugar content into bioethanol. On the other hand, the much smaller microalgae has a high percentage of lipids or oil, a perfect candidate for biodiesel.
So these are all cultures of microalgae. In a culture like this, we have probably billions of cells.
Ian Probert identifies different species and determines their properties. For example, some grow quickly, others produce more oil. For biodiesel, the ideal variety would be one that shares both traits.
There's the possibility that we could genetically modify organisms to have a combination of different traits, which would be attractive for potentially producing biofuels.
The question is an ethical one that will undoubtedly face governments in the future.
Algae are amazing little critters.
In the meantime, American, British and French petroleum companies are investing hundreds of millions of euros into research on naturally occurring varieties, something environmentalists are approaching with caution.
We need to ask the question that we didn't ask when we developed the first generation of biofuels, and that's what are the environmental and social impacts of this technology? Are there unknown impacts? You need an enormous surface to cultivate algae. What energy will it require? How will we feed this algae?
Today, no one has the answer to these questions, but there's still time. Experts estimate it will take at least another 10 years before algae-based biofuel could be produced on a commercial scale. While algae may not be the fuel of tomorrow, a team of French and Spanish researchers are hoping it may be the fuel of not too far in the future. A project in Spain is producing bio-oil from algae mixed with carbon dioxide. The microalgae reproduces in these green tubes at high speed through photosynthesis and from the CO2 released from an adjacent cement factory. Every day, some of this highly concentrated liquid is extracted and filtered to produce a biomass that is turned into the bio-oil.
We're creating a real alternative to the energy derived from fossil fuels. The same fossil fuel you get from the Middle East. We'll be able to use it in everyday life, in cars, in aeroplanes. We won't need to change already existing models to be able to use the petrol, because it's the same petrol that you find at petrol stations.
Here at the Maison de Whisky, there's literally hundreds of labels on offer, and not surprisingly, the large majority of them come from the home of whisky itself, and that's of course Scotland. Whisky is already a cornerstone of the Scottish economy, but now scientists have discovered a way to turn byproducts from its production into a low-carbon biofuel. Our correspondents in Edinburgh went to see how it works.
Whisky flows like water in this Edinburgh pub. In Scotland, they call it the water of life. It's a point of national pride and is the country's biggest export. And in winter, it's used to light up those dark Scottish nights.
Warms the cockles of your heart.
And here's the fuel as it leaves the Tullibardine distillery. Soon, it could also be powering Scottish cars thanks to 2 whisky byproducts. The first appears at the moment of distillation. It's the residue of malted barley called draft.
What you're looking at, this is draft.
The second byproduct, pot ale, is the coppery water found at the bottom of the still after the first distillation. In a laboratory at Napier University in Edinburgh, the 2 derivatives are transformed into biobutanol, a biofuel. To do this, the whisky byproducts are mixed with organisms in an airtight vacuum.
When we mix draff with pot ale, we create a soup that these organisms are capable of fermenting, and they'll convert the sugars that exist in the draff and pot ale into higher value chemicals, and in particular butanol.
As a fuel, biobutanol has a number of advantages over bioethanol.
Butanol is a different alcohol. It has 4 carbons instead of 2, and that makes it a more powerful energy source. It also means that we can use it in car engines without modifying the engines, and we can use the existing infrastructure to distribute and store this as a fuel.
The energy potential to be had from whisky byproducts does not stop there. It also gives the industry as a whole the chance to update its image and boost its green credentials.
Scotch whisky is an iconic product. It relies very heavily on a pristine environment from which we draw our cereals, from which we draw our water and our wood. It's a reputational issue for the industry as well as a very strong production issue. So we're seeing new distilleries being opened that are using state-of-the-art technology to become self-sufficient in energy terms.
In 2011, whisky exports soared by 23%, which helped to finance such investment. And in the cellars, the drops of gold are becoming just a touch greener.
One could say that Scotland's love affair with whisky is equally rivalled by France's appreciation for duck, and nowhere is that more obvious than in a kitchen with a chef from the southwest. Here we can see duck confit, which involves cooking the leg of a bird in its own fat. While duck has a well-established role in French cuisine, there is an emerging market for the leftover fat. Farmers have taken to recycling it, creating biodiesel with a gourmet spin.
It looks like a regular tractor, a standard motor making its ordinary noise. But when it goes to fill up at this farmer's cooperative pump, there's something a bit different about the fuel going into the engine. This biodiesel is homemade with an unexpected byproduct from the farm.
Well, it's made from a mix of duck fat and oil from the fryer, which is transformed through a process called esterification. And from that we get this biodiesel, which is a green fuel.
In the Dordogne, it's something of a local industry, and it's no coincidence since there's no shortage of raw material in frying pans across the region.
Everything you see there in the pan, we'll extract that afterwards. We don't want to put that in the dish because it's not very tasty anyway.
Instead of pouring it down the drain, 20 restaurants in the area save their duck fat. It's then sent off for processing, where it's heated and alcohol's added to the mixture. The first pressing reveals a watery form of biodiesel that's not yet fit for use. The price of this hybrid fuel comes in at around the same as regular agricultural diesel. The real advantage, however, is diminishing the impact on the environment.
When you're next to a diesel-fueled car, you're breathing in noxious fumes. Now we've analysed emissions from this biodiesel, and we've proved that they don't produce the same kind of fumes.
Just 3 vehicles are running on duck fat for the moment. It's still at the experimental stage. Just a drop in what could become an ocean of a cleaner, greener way of getting around the farm.
Merci beaucoup. It's about time we leave you for this week's show. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to stay in contact via Facebook and Twitter. I'll see you next week.